Okay, so first of all, I would say welcome to everybody, but really you're going to be welcoming me because everybody's really been here. I just showed up. But first of all, thank you so much to everybody for coming, for joining us, and especially a big thank you to Ms. Capel for really putting it together so much, and as well to Mrs. Atias for having this idea, this brainchild that took place in the summertime, and we had a successful program a few months ago, and we decided let's do it again. And Baruch Hashem, I hope everybody really gained from all the inspiration over the course of the day. So thank you so much to everybody who worked so hard to put it together. Thank you. So we're supposed to be talking about sensitivity. That's the topic of the day. Today's topic that we're going to speak about over here is sensitivity in all our relationships. That's the idea. And specifically, we're going to try to hopefully give some tips, okay, talking about how we can grow in sensitivity and really what the Torah expects of us when it comes to our sensitivity, okay? And being that I'm the last speaker, we need to try to practice our sensitivity. So I'm going to try to speak as briefly as possible. Okay. So I want to begin with a story that I heard not too long ago from my dear colleague Rabbi Eisenman, who said an incredible thing. He said that, and he heard the story firsthand from a friend of his who lives in Lakewood, New Jersey, who is the son of one of the Rosh Yeshiva of the Lakewood Yeshiva. There's Rabbi Yerucham Olshin Shlita, one of the Gedolei Hador, one of the leaders of this generation. And his son told him the following. He said it was a few years ago on Simchas Torah, and Rav Olshin and his family invited over, I believe it was 4 students from the yeshiva, to come to their house for the meal, for one of the day meals on Simchas Torah. And Rav Yerucham told the boys that he told them that we're going to be eating the lunch, we're going to be eating the meal right after davening, instead of going first to Hakafos. Because the Hakafos in Lakewood, as you can imagine, they're very, very long and exciting, and it goes on for a long time. So some people would have the meal prior to the Hakafos, and then come in sometime in the middle of the dancing. Other people would stay for the whole dancing, and then have the meal later. So he informed the boys, he said, we're going to be having the meal right after the davening. We're going to come home, have the meal, and then we'll go back for the Hakafos. Turns out that he's home and everything, and the boys come, but there's only 2 boys that come to the door. And he asked them, what's with the other boys? What happened? He said, we don't know. I don't know. Didn't see them. Okay, figures they'll still come at some point, maybe they'll still knock. They come in, they begin the meal. 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour go by, and the other 2 boys do not show up. They didn't come to the meal. Okay, what are we going to do? So they continue, they finish on with the meal, and they move on to the Hakafos. And at a certain point, I'm not sure if it was Rav Olshin himself or one of the family members realizes that the boys probably thought that the meal was going to be later. Maybe they didn't get the message, maybe they just forgot the message. But either way, the meal wasn't going to be, they thought the meal wouldn't take place till later. And as soon as Rav Yerucham realized this, he went home, he informed his family, and they decided what they were going to do when these boys come. And I think that, I can pretty safely assume that, if it were me in that situation, okay, so listen, when the boys come, if they come later on, if they show up, listen, we have plenty of leftovers from the meal. I'll invite them in, okay, they'll have I'll give them a plate, okay, and they'll sit down, they'll make hamotzi, etc. Okay, they'll have the meal. No. The Olshin family together decided that what they're going to do is they're going to stage an entirely different meal. A whole nother meal, just so that these 2 boys don't feel embarrassed because they missed the meal coming earlier. And that's exactly what happened. When the boys knocked on the door later, the table was all set. Rebitz and Olshin had all of the food ready to go once again. Everybody, the whole family, sat down at the table, and they had the meal all, from scratch, the whole thing. Again, with the singing and the Divrei Torah as if nothing had happened earlier. And, when you stop and you think about this story, you think about our Gedolim, how it's incredible that they have such sensitivity to care to go that far. Not just Revulsion, the entire family, Revulsion, his Rebbitzin, all the children, everybody was involved in this. To avoid that feeling, that slight embarrassment that the boys are going to feel, they went so far, they went all out to stage an entire meal. And the first question that we have to address when it comes to sensitivity, I think, is how much weight does the Torah really put on this concept of sensitivity? Like, where does it rank in all the mitzvahs? You have idolatry, right? Like, that's a big no-no. Okay, we have kashrus, right? That's a big one. Okay, where does sensitivity towards other people, the actions that the Olshin family did for those two boys, where does that rank? How important is that in the eyes of Hashem? And if you look at one of the infamous stories in the Torah, the story of the Egel Hazav, we could find something incredible. See, Moshe Rabbeinu was up there learning Torah with Hashem, and we know that the Jewish people miscalculated, and they thought that Moshe Rabbeinu was supposed to come down, but he didn't come down yet. So they decided, and there was this whole brewing going on, that we need a new leader. So, what are we supposed to do? And everybody thinks Moshe's dead, we're going to set up a new leader, and all of a sudden the Pasuk tells us that Aaron steps in, and he does something very weird. Aaron steps into the picture, and he tells everybody that they should remove their jewelry, because we're going to throw the jewelry into this big pot. And at first glance, it looks like Aaron is like getting involved in the Avera that we know Klal Yisrael eventually did, of building the Egel. It looks like Aaron is participating, and all of the Rishonim are bothered by this. What is he doing? What's going on here? And if you look at source number 1 on your sheet, the Das HaKenim tells us something unbelievable. He says, of course Aaron had no interest in participating in the Egel. Aaron's intentions were purely l'shem shamayim. And I'm going to say the beginning part outside, just in the interest of time. But Aaron went through a thought process as follows. He said, listen, what am I supposed to do? The Jewish people, they all want a new leader. And they think that Moshe's dead, and they're convinced that Moshe's dead. So what are my options? So he went through his options. Option number 1 is, listen, I could appoint a new leader. There were some great people in Klal Yisrael. Kalev was one of them. Nachshon was another one of them. I could appoint one of these people as the new leader. He says, nah, that's not a good idea, because if I appoint them, then what's going to happen when Moshe comes back? Then the people who appointed Nachshon or Kalev, they're going to say, oh, I want him as the leader. Now there's going to be a whole civil war. Forget it, not a good option. So he discounts that possibility. He then says, well, maybe I should just let the people decide on a new leader. That we know is not going to be a good option, right? So if he lets them decide on a new leader, then of course there's going to be civil war and it'll be terrible. Then he says, I have option number 3 is, maybe I could appoint myself as the new leader. And if I step up, then this whole thing will just stop. But he discounts that idea as well. And the reason why is as follows, and we'll look at it in the underline up top. It says, V'im omer ani eya rosh aleim. And he said that if I were to be the head over them, shema yikshe be'enei Moshe. Maybe this would be difficult in the eyes of Moshe. And the way that my Rosh Yeshiva of Henoch Leibowitz Zatzal explained this is as follows. He said that Aaron felt that when Moshe comes down and sees Aaron in this position of leadership, it's going to some degree bother Moshe. My brother took my position. My brother stepped in place of me. It's not so nice to me. And to some extent, this is going to bother Moshe. And Aaron says, I don't want to do that. I can't hurt my brother. And therefore, Aaron says, this is not a good possibility. Therefore, I'm stuck. I don't know what to do. So he decides that, you know what, let's just tell everybody to take off your jewelry, and we're going to try to delay them, because he knew that the women, the Nashim Tzidkanios, wouldn't go for this. And eventually, hopefully, by the time that this whole issue is resolved with the jewelry, Moshe Rabbeinu will come back. And that's exactly what he does. You stop and you analyze this for a moment. What? Does this make any sense? Moshe Rabbeinu would feel upset with Aaron for stepping up to this position? Why? Why would he feel that? Moshe Rabbeinu, we know, was the humblest of all people, the Torah tells us. He was Anav Mikol Adam. And of course, Moshe Rabbeinu knew that his brother was a big tzaddik. When he looks at Aaron and he sees what he does, I'm sure he would assume that Aaron had a good reason for doing this, for stepping up into his position. And it's probably safe to assume that the moment Moshe gets to the bottom of the mountain, Aaron will run over to him and explain to him why he did what he did, why he stepped into that position. So, what are we talking about? We're talking about a little bit of pain that Moshe might feel. He might feel. For a very, very short period of time, because Aaron's going to inform him that he didn't really intend on stealing the position. Small pain for a short period of time. Yet due to that little bit of pain, Aaron said, you know what? I can't do it. I can't do it. Even though he knew that there was this talk that was brewing of potentially making an Egel, he didn't know for sure that it was going to happen, but it was being discussed. Nonetheless, Aaron said it doesn't make a difference. I cannot do something that maybe, it says maybe, that maybe will cause my brother Moshe some slight little bit of pain. That's how far the Torah tells us that we have to go when it comes to sensitivity towards other people. And when you stop and you think about Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim that I know Rabbi Glatt was speaking about before, Rabbi Akiva's Talmidim, 24,000 that died because they didn't show honor to each other, which was very, very slight. But one can ask the following question: where was Rabbi Akiva in all this? How come Rabbi Akiva, the person, the great Rabbi Rabbi Akiva who preached, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, you should love your friend like yourself, why didn't he stop his students from doing whatever Avera they were doing? Why didn't he rebuke them and tell them to stop this behavior, because who knows what's going to happen? Rav Yerucham Levavitz answers that question. He says, you know why? Because the Avera that they did, the lack of honor that they showed each other was so slight that even Rabbi Akiva didn't pick up on it. He didn't even see it. He didn't recognize it. Yet unfortunately we know what their fate was because of that slight lack of honor that was displayed towards their friend. And, it's something that, to highlight how important this is. And that's probably where revulsion was coming from. When you invite them over and the whole family is in on this brand new meal, yes, because to slightly hurt somebody, even in the slightest way, is so huge in the eyes of Hashem. There's a story told about there's a rabbi. He goes over to this particular husband in his congregation. He says, I had to tell you, your wife came over to me and she says that, you don't have any empathy. So, you don't have any empathy. And so the husband looks back at the rabbi with this inquisitive look and he says, I really don't understand why she feels that way. So that's, when we, oftentimes we don't necessarily realize the lack of empathy that may be taking place. We don't necessarily realize the lack of sensitivity that might be taking place. However, in the Torah's view, it's absolutely incredibly critical. We just experienced Pesach not too long ago. And, don't worry, because the Pesach prep does not start again for another 11 months, I believe. Okay, so there's no reason to worry. But we are still feeling Pesach because, many people are still feeling like that indigestion from, from all the matzah. 2 nights Pesach. I know some were in Israel for Pesach, so then, okay, maybe, so 1 night, so then we get out of that. Okay, yeah, Baruch Hashem. Okay, next year in Yerushalayim. Amen. Okay, right. So, but we just experienced Pesach. And we spoke on the Seder night, we all spoke about the terrible Shibud Mitzrayim, about what the Jewish people went through during that time period. And it was awful. It was awful. We know about the fact that the Jews were in complete oppression. The Medrash actually tells us that the Mitzrim used to use the Jews in place of animals okay, to plow the fields. They would give the animals a break, and they would put the Jews in place of them. We know what happened to the babies, okay? Not only, I don't want to say only, but Jewish babies were drowned in the Nile as well. Jewish babies, unfortunately, were used to be used as bricks. It was terrible. It was terrible, the oppression that took place. There's a medrash that tells us that the reason why we have Arov, the reason why Hashem brought the wild beasts upon the Egyptians, is because what they used to do to us is that they would send the Jews out into the forest to just collect wild animals and bring them back so that the Egyptians could use them for their circuses, etc. And there were obviously a lot of casualties that took place as a result of them doing that. And during that time, while the Jewish people were experiencing this terrible, terrible oppression, Moshe Rabbeinu, who grew up in the palace of Paro, comes out of his palace, comes out of there, and the pasuk tells us. You look at the next source on your sheet towards the bottom, Shmos Beis Yud Aleph, says as follows. The pasuk says that Moshe Rabbeinu comes out, Vayi bayom mahim, vayigdal Moshe. Moshe had already grown up. He was a young man at this point in time. He was not a child. Vayetze alachiv, and he goes out to his brothers, Vayar b'sivlosam, and he sees their pain. He sees the atrocities that are taking place. He sees all this oppression. He sees what's happening with the babies. He sees what's happening. People are being beaten. Vayarish mitzri makeh shivri me'achav. He sees an Egyptian man hitting one of his Jewish brothers. And Rashi tells us something unbelievable. What does this mean? Vayar b'sivlosam. He saw their pain. What does that mean? Rashi tells us that what Moshe Rabbeinu did was as follows. On the bottom of the page it says, Nasan eina v'libo lios meitzar alehem. He set his eyes and heart to be in pain over them. What that means is as follows, that when he went out of the palace and he looked and he saw what was going on over there, he stopped and he focused in on what was happening. He focused on the Mitzri hitting the Jew. He focused on all the pain that was going on around him. He probably witnessed Pisom and Ramses, these cities that were just sink, and unfortunately the buildings would collapse on the Jewish workers that were working there. But he didn't just walk by. He stopped. He was Nasan Einav. He focused his eyes, Velibo, and his heart, and he focused on what was happening. And then he saw their pain. And once again, my Rosh Hashiva asked an incredible question. He said, if any of us were there, would you assume that in order to feel the pain of the Jewish people that were going on, in order to feel what was really happening in this these terrible atrocities, do you think you have to stop and focus? Is there really a need to stop and look and nosein eina v'libo and really set my heart towards what's happening and focus on the events that are taking place? Isn't it automatic? The moment that you walk out of that palace and you see what's happening, there's no need to focus. You would automatically feel the pain. You look out and you see your brothers and sisters being beaten to that extent. Of course you're going to feel the pain. It's terrible. What am I looking at? This is awful. What's going on to my brothers and sisters? So why is it that Moshe Rabbeinu had to focus? He had to be Nasan Eina V'libo. He had to focus his eyes and his heart to recognize what was happening. Why did he have to do that? Isn't it obvious? And the answer that my Rosh Hashiva said is as follows. Of course, Moshe Rabbeinu, when he went out, Moshe Rabbeinu, with his infinite love for people, and he went out there, he saw what they were going through, and he really felt bad for them. And he really felt their pain. However, if a person wants to really, really feel for somebody else, you can't just walk by and witness it and then walk back. You have to stop, focus, and really internalize what's happening. Person needs to really stop and look and really internalize the message. And even though it could be as terrible as what was happening during the times of Mitzrayim, however, it doesn't make a difference. Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to feel their pain on the highest of levels And in order to do that, he needed to stop and to focus, to reflect, and to think, to really, really think and try to put himself into their shoes, like you're saying, and to really feel their pain. And it was only at that point that Moshe Rabbeinu understood and felt what Klal Yisrael was going through on the highest of levels. You know, in 1999, there were two cognitive psychologists by the names of Daniel Simons and Christopher Chabris, and they did an incredible study. I believe the study came out of Harvard University, where they did the following. A very cool study. They had 6 people, put them in a room. Right? 3 of the people were wearing white t-shirts. 3 of the people were wearing black t-shirts. Okay? And they had 2 basketballs. And the goal was that the people with the black t-shirts are going to be passing the one ball in between themselves, these 3 people. And the guys with the white t-shirts, they're going to be passing the ball amongst themselves. Okay? And this is going to go on for 30 seconds. And they were going to video this. And people who are watching the video are supposed to watch for 30 seconds, and they're supposed to count how many passes there were between the white team. How many passes there were between the white team. Now, if you watch the study, it's very cool because they're all kind of like interdispersed amongst each other, so it's a little bit confusing. So you gotta focus and watch how many passes there were within the white team. Now, what happened was, about, I believe it was 10 seconds into the clip, they sent out into where this whole basketball game was happening, this guy dressed in a huge gorilla outfit. Huge, full head-to-toe gorilla outfit. And he goes in the middle of this, and he stands right in front of the video camera, and he starts banging, just like this, okay? Starts banging his chest for 9 seconds straight, okay? The basketballs are still being bounced and still being passed, etc. while this is going on. After the 9 seconds, he leaves. Then we still have another 10 seconds left to go of basketball passes. And after that, the video stops. Now, they asked the people who were watching this, they asked them, the first thing that they asked them was, did you count properly? What was the number of passes that went on between the white team? And pretty much everybody got it correct. It was 15 passes. 15 passes between the white team. Okay, very cool. Then they asked them, I'm just curious, did you happen to notice that there was a gorilla that walked onto the screen? Did you happen to notice that? Come on. That sounds ridiculous, right? I mean, if it was any of us, of course we would have noticed, right? So you would have noticed that there's a big gorilla on the screen, 9 seconds, there, banging his chest. What? Of course you noticed that. Well, these guys won a Nobel Prize for their study because they discovered that 50% of the people that they interviewed did not notice the gorilla. 50% of those that were interviewed did not notice. They didn't notice the gorilla.
Were they men or women?
I'm not going to answer that question. No. I don't know. That is a very good question. I'm sure they were men. I'm sure the 50% that didn't notice were all men. Exactly. So I don't know. I don't know the answer to that one, but they didn't notice. They didn't notice, and that's why these guys won a Nobel Prize for this, for this study. And they concluded as follows. And I'm going to read to you from the study. This is what these 2 guys concluded. They said that this experiment reveals 2 things: that we are missing a lot of what goes on around us. That's number 1. And number 2, that we have no idea that we are missing so much. We're missing a lot, and we have no idea that we're missing so much. They say that people can focus so hard on something that they become blind to the unexpected, even when staring right at it. When one develops inattentional blindness, as this effect is called, it becomes easy to miss details when one is not looking out for them. Moshe Rabbeinu would have seen the gorilla. If Moshe Rabbeinu would have done this study, would have participated, he would have seen it. Because you have to be no sein einav, as Rashi told us. The first thing that we have to do is be no sein einav. Focus our eyes. Wake up. We have to see what's happening around us. We can have, as this study shows, right, we can see, there could be something right in front of our faces, yet we can miss it. And how often that could happen in our relationships, in the human relationships that we have with everybody that we come in contact with. People could be undergoing some type of stress. Those around us could be experiencing something challenging, something difficult in their life. And it could be going on even at that moment. But the human condition is such that we could miss it, even if it's right in front of us. And Rashi's telling us something critical, that what Moshe Rabbeinu had to do is he had to be no sein einav. Even though he saw such terrible things in front of him, he still had to stop, and look and see what was really happening. But Rashi told us a second thing as well. It was no sein einav v'libo. He had to focus his heart as well, because it's a two-step process. The first thing that we need to do is focus our eyes on what's going on around us and really be in tune to what's happening. The second thing that we have to do once we're in tune is to internalize it. Focus our hearts on that situation. To see our fellow Jew who we come in contact with, to see them, see what they're going through, whether it be a challenge or whether it be something great, whether it be an incredible milestone. But to see it and then to really feel it in our hearts, what that person is going through. When our child has a graduation, right, or something like that. It's something that easily could be missed. However, to think about it, let's say a kindergarten, right, a little boy, a little girl, to graduate kindergarten, that's huge. That's huge for the child. It's an incredible thing. We need to be no sein einav v'libo, to focus. The child's having a graduation. What does that mean to the child? How important is it to him or to her? And in turn, that will cause us to display the proper sensitivity towards them in that situation. I actually read an incredible story. It took place, the year was 1945, and the Arabs were throwing grenades and bombs into various cities in Eretz Yisrael. Unfortunately, this is something that we have become used to. And this was going on during that year, and all of the Jews during that time were running for shelter. Everybody was hiding out in the bomb shelters. And the only people who weren't were the people who were working in the hospitals and the people who had to be there, because the casualties were enormous. And the injuries were enormous, and people were just being brought into the hospitals by the droves. And the people who were working there had tons of work, everybody coming in, and there was one individual there who saw something rather unique and pretty incredible. As he was working in the hospital, he sees that the great tzaddik of that time, Rav Aryeh Levin, walks into the hospital with another man. And he comes running in, and he clearly had this look that he had to accomplish something. And he wanted to see, what's Rav Aryeh, what's he doing here? So Rav Aryeh comes in the hospital, and he looks around, and because there were so few rooms, unfortunately, because there were so many casualties, there were bodies, unfortunately, that were all over the place. They were in the hallway. And Rav Aryeh Levin went over to the first body that he saw, put his hand on the sheet that was covering the body. He uncovers the sheet, uncovers the body, instructs the man that he's with. He says, take out the camera, take out the camera. The man takes out the camera, and Rav Aryeh said, take a picture. And he takes a picture of the body. The person who was witnessing this said, what? Rav Aryeh Levin, the great tzaddik, what's he doing? What are you taking pictures of dead bodies for? How inappropriate. He said, maybe he's doing this because he wants to have proof to the world of what the Arabs are doing, so he could send this out, it could go out to the papers, but that's not a valid justification to do something like that. So the man calls out to Rav Aryeh, he says, Rav Aryeh, where's your kavod hameis? Where's your honor? Where's your dignity for the dead? And in the meanwhile, while this was going on, Rav Aryeh had already taken pictures of a few of the bodies that were there. And Rav Aryeh looked at him and he said, I understand what you're saying. He goes, but you have to understand. So you see, when I heard that the grenades and the bombs were going off, I had a feeling that the casualties would be enormous. And I also had a feeling that the hospitals, being that they're very small and they don't have enough space, would try to get rid of the bodies as soon as possible and bury them. And I was nervous that if that would happen, that there would be many men that may be buried that would be unidentified. And if that happens, then their wives are going to remain agunos. And if their wives are going to remain agunos, so then that would be terrible. That would be such a terrible thing for them. So I decided at that moment that the appropriate thing is to run out here, and I got this man to come with me, this photographer who said that he would come and join me to do this incredible mitzvah, to take pictures of the bodies so that afterwards the Rabbanim could identify it, to allow their wives to be able to remarry. Wow. Rav Aryeh Levin was a person who understood this Rashi. He understood and he emulated and he followed the ways of Moshe Rabbeinu. Rav Aryeh Levin was nosein einav v'libo lios meitzar aleim. He set his eyes and his heart to feel the pain of those going on, while everybody else during that time was sitting in their bomb shelters scared, understandably so, during that time period. Rav Aryeh Levin was sitting in his shelter thinking and processing and focusing on the pain of all of Klal Yisrael and what they were going through during that time. And he was thinking about the possible outcome that could happen and the negative results. And he decided to risk his life, to go out into the streets, to go to that hospital, to be able to take pictures, to be able to save these people in the future. So the first step is that a person really, that we need to not be like the people in the study. Don't be like those men in the study, right? Who couldn't see the invisible gorilla. By the way, it's known as the invisible gorilla study. If you want to look it up online, you could do it. But the problem is that now everybody knows about it, so then they automatically see the gorilla. So, but they did a whole nother study on that, which is fascinating. But we could talk about that at a different time. But the invisible gorilla study. But we don't want to be like those people who don't notice. So the first thing when it comes to sensitivity, the first tip that I could potentially offer is to notice, to stop and focus, to open up our eyes to what's happening around us, and to look and to really see and to really internalize what others are experiencing. But what else should I focus on? There's got to be more. There's got to be more. When we think about the word leadership, think about the term leader. What does that mean? When we're looking for a leader, looking for somebody to head the country, to lead us, what are we looking for? Yes, we're looking for lower taxes. Of course, right? That's a given. But besides for lower taxes, right, what is it that we're looking for in a leader? And if you look this up, you're going to find many, many definitions. However, the Torah tells us something very, very unique. When Moshe Rabbeinu was about to pass away, he was thinking about the future of Klal Yisrael. And he has a request that's on the back of your sheet. It's a pasuk in Bamidbar, it's a pasuk in Parshas Pinchas, where Moshe has a conversation with Hashem. And Moshe says as follows, Vaydaber Moshe el Hashem leimor. Moshe says to Hashem, speaking, Yivkod Hashem Elokei aruchos l'chol basar. Ishal ha'ida. He says, let Hashem, the source of the breath of all flesh, appoint someone over the community. Moshe is asking Hashem, could you please appoint a new leader to lead the Jewish people? I'm stepping down, or I'm going to die, right? And so let's appoint Let's appoint a new leader. However, there are these vague words in the middle there. He says, Yifkod Hashem Elokei Haruchos. Hashem, the source of the breath of all flesh, should appoint someone over the community. Why doesn't Moshe just talk straight? Just say, Hashem, could you please appoint somebody over the community? Right? Please appoint a new leader. And the Medrash Tanchuma tells us something unbelievable. And we'll read it in the English right below. Moshe Rabbeinu was saying the following. It's in the middle of a discussion here. He says that if he sees a crowd, it's referring to anybody, if you see crowds of human beings, he says, any individual says, blessed is the one who is learned in mysteries. This is a bracha that we say, it's very, very rare, but we would say in very, very large crowds of people, we'd say, Baruch Chacham Harazim. Right? Blessed is the Hashem, who's so wise, who knows all the secrets of the world. We're not going to get into into that bracha specifically. He says, just as their faces are unlike each other, referring to all the people in this crowd, so are they unlike in knowledge. Rather, each and every individual has his own individual knowledge. Because of what Moshe asked from Hashem at the time of his death, he said to him, Master of the world, the knowledge of each and every person is revealed to you, and one person is unlike the other. Now that I am departing from them, I request of you, if you desire to appoint a leader over them, appoint over them a person who will bear with each and every one of them according to his knowledge. Moshe Rabbeinu is saying something absolutely unbelievable to Hashem. Saying, you know what we need for a new leader? You know what the requirement is for a new leader? The next person to bring Klal Yisrael into Eretz Yisrael? What we need is somebody who understands every single individual. We need a person who understands that every single person has a different level of knowledge, and I assume it means not just knowledge, but a different take on the world. Every single person has different midos. Every single person has a different life setting. And we need a leader that can understand the needs of every single individual. Not just somebody who understands what's good, the greater good for the klal. Not just a person who knows, who can make the decisions, should the people go to war or not? Okay, that's a big decision, that's important. But we need a leader who could get into each and every single person and understand each person and be able to guide and help each person on their own level with their own knowledge and their own understanding. There's an incredible story I heard recently. My dear friend and colleague and chavrusa, Rabbi Blinder from the high school, shared with me an incredible story. See, Rav Shach, one of the Gedolei Hador of the last generation, he was known to be an incredible masmid. Rav Shach, when people talk about him, Rav Shach was just always engrossed in learning. Always. There's a story that's told that there was a student from his yeshiva who happened to wake up in the middle of the night. It was like 3 a.m. He happened to wake up and he was he was walking around, and all of a sudden he notices somebody coming. He looked, he sees, who is that? It's the Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Shach. 3 a.m. What's the Rosh Yeshiva doing? And Rav Shach came over to him and he said, I can't go to sleep. I can't go to sleep because I'm so engrossed in the sugya and the topic that I'm learning. I'm so engrossed. I can't fall asleep. Would you be able to learn with me now? To sit down to learn with me now, so we could, possibly understand what's going on, because I can't go to sleep. That's the type of person that he was. There are numerous stories like that. He was constantly learning Torah. And in fact, every single Friday night in his community, between Kabbalah Shabbos and Mariv, the local rabbis would all get together in the shul, and they would discuss various Torah topics, obviously on an extremely high level. They would discuss important shilos, important issues that were coming up. It was during that time, during that 15, 20-minute period. This would go on every single week. And all of a sudden, there was one Friday night where in the middle of the discussion that was going on, an elderly man, an elderly Jew, came over to Rav Shach, and he started talking to him. And he started talking politics with Rav Shach, and he started explaining to him all of his political opinions and what he thinks about what's going on, in the country, and what he thinks is going on abroad, and etc. He starts going on, and Rav Shach is listening to the conversation, and he's listening to him, and he's nodding his head. He's clearly very engaged and involved in the conversation. Okay, eventually they begin Mariv. And they continue on. The following week, same thing happens. Right at the beginning of when the rabbis are supposed to meet and get together, this elderly Jew came over to Rav Shach, and he starts talking to him again about politics. And Rav Shach says, "Let's go. Let's talk politics." And they're talking politics, 15, 20 minutes, and then is Mariv. And this continues a few weeks in a row. And eventually somebody went over to Rav Shach and he said to him, "Rebbe, with all due respect, I'm just wondering, why are you giving this man so much time with this discussion about politics? I understand one week, 2 weeks, but okay, why don't you politely tell him that you're involved in a very, very important discussion? You're involved in all of these questions that these big rabbis are discussing, the deep Torah topics that they're involved in. Why don't you just tell the person that I'm sorry, but I can't have that discussion. I can't be continuing with talking politics during this time." And listen to what Rav Shach answered. I'm going to quote to you from the book. This is what he said. He said, "This Jew lives all week for these few moments of pleasure, when he could come and find someone here to listen to his weekly report. Am I going to take all his zest for life away from him?" Isn't that unbelievable? Rav Shach looked and he recognized, he saw and he understood that every single person is different, and he understood that this man has his particular needs. This particular man, it was very important to him to have somebody to listen to his political views. That was something that meant a lot to this man. And Rav Shach saw that, recognized that, and he gave that to this individual. Despite the fact that Rav Shach was a tremendous masmid, and the most important thing to him in general was learning, and he'd be up at 3, 4 in the morning learning Torah. However, when he saw and he recognized that this individual who has his particular needs that might be different than somebody else's needs, but he saw that he has these needs and I could fill that need, and that's what Rav Shach automatically came to do. There's another story that I heard recently, in which I was in Memphis, Tennessee a few weeks ago for Shabbos, and the rabbi of the shul over there of the Young Israel, Rabbi Akiva Males, said the following incredible story. The story is not in print anywhere because he was the one who experienced it. He said that the great gadol Rav Pam, who was also one of the gedolim of the last generation, was somebody who we know. We know that he was a great gadol of learning. He was a big Rosh Yeshiva, somebody who gave his life for Klal Yisrael, and somebody who was also very busy. And Rabbi Meir said that when he was single, he used to go for Shabbosim he would travel from the yeshiva where he was, which was in Queens. He would go oftentimes for Shabbosim to work in a home that was in Brooklyn for children that had developmental disabilities. And he would work there all Shabbos, as there were several counselors like himself who would come, and they would take care of the needs of these boys that were in this home all Shabbos. They would take them to shul, being that they were relatively higher functioning. They would take care of their needs. They would provide for them a Shabbos, the meals, etc., and take care of them for those 24 hours. And he did this for several weeks. Now, there was one boy who told him one time, he told me, I grew up in a shul in Brooklyn where Rav Pam was the rabbi, which happened to be true, right? Many years back, Rav Pam was a rav in a small shul in Brooklyn, And this young man, he said that, I grew up in that shul. Very interesting. Okay. A few hours later, he goes back to Rabbi Mills, and he says, I want to tell you that I have this great Dvar Torah in this week's Parsha, and he shares it with Rabbi Mills. That's beautiful, says Rabbi Mills. He goes, yeah, I know it's beautiful because I told it to Rav Pam, and he really liked it. To which Rabbi Mills said, really? You told this to Rav Pam? He said, yeah. He said, I speak to Rav Pam. I speak to him every single week. I talk to Rav Pam. And I told him the Dvar Torah. Now, Rabbi Mills thought to himself, he said, sounds a little interesting. And, again, he knew that the boy had challenges, okay, had developmental challenges, and it didn't add up. It didn't make sense. You're talking to Rav Pam every week. When, how, what? Like, really? Okay. But, he let it go. And then the following week, once again on Friday, he tells him, yeah, I spoke to Rav Pam. I told him my Dvar Torah for this week, and he really liked it. Really? Okay, what's the Dvar Torah? The boy shares the Dvar Torah, etc., etc. And this goes on for a few weeks, and Rabbi Mills, as well as the other counselors, are skeptical as to whether this conversation with Rav Pam is really happening, or is it just, all kind of made up. And one week he gets there early on Friday afternoon, and Rabbi Mills sees that the boy is on the phone. He's having an intense conversation with somebody. So he quickly goes over, and while he's on the phone, he says, so who are you talking to? Who are you talking to? Right? Wanted to know, who's on the phone? So the boy puts his hand on the receiver, and he says, it's Rav Pam. And Rabbi Mills says, oh, okay. He says, okay, now he says, I'm going to find out once and for all, because upstairs there was another phone that was connected to the same line. And he said, I'm going to go upstairs, I'm going to pick up the phone, I'm going to find out. And he quickly runs up the stairs and he picks up the phone, and lo and behold, he hears the voice of the great Gadol Ador of Pam on the phone listening to this Dvar Torah. And every single week, not for a month, not for 2 months, but for years, every single Friday, Rav Pam would give this boy 5 to 10 minutes of his time, of his busy schedule on a Friday afternoon. Sometime I'm sure many of us at like 5 o'clock on Friday afternoon are just kind of like twiddling our thumbs, kind of like wondering what to do, right? At that time, when everybody's busy, one of the leaders of Klal Yisrael, who has so much on his shoulders and so much going on, gave 5-10 minutes of his time weekly for this boy, because he understood that every single person in Klal Yisrael has their needs. Every single person is different, and every single person deserves the ultimate kavod and the ultimate sensitivity. And I just want to conclude with a brief review, and then we're going to hold it here just to end off. First of all, we can't forget the incredible importance that the Torah gives to this idea of sensitivity. Even the slightest bit of pain that someone would experience, or even the slightest bit of happiness that you could cause somebody else, is so huge. You should always remember what happened with Aaron and Moshe, and how Aaron didn't want to cause even the slightest bit of pain to his brother. And as well, we can never forget the lesson of Moshe Rabbeinu. How Moshe Rabbeinu was nosein einav v'libo. Moshe Rabbeinu focused his eyes and his heart to see what's happening around him, to really feel it, to not be like the people of the invisible gorilla study, okay, but rather to see what's going on around us and really, really zero in on it. And ultimately, lastly, to really understand that all the people that we're involved with, all the people that we have relationships with are all unique individuals with their own set of challenges, with their own life setting, and therefore we need to act with them in accordance to who they are and understand everything that they need. So once again, a big thank you to all those who helped to make this event happen, and thank you so much everybody for coming. Are there any questions? Any arguments?
When's the next one?
When's the next one? Ms. Capel, when's the next one?
So for next year, it would be arranged with the PTA. Our first big one, God willing, will be in the beginning of the school year for